All right, we're going to continue on with the hair jig theme that we've been doing for the past few videos. In my vise, I have a man super shad jig head that I got from Lure Parts online. These jig heads look pretty good, and more importantly, they fish really well. So I have a 3/8 right now in my vise. I'm just going to get my thread started. I'm using Vivus 140. The belly is going to be bucktail. And for this bucktail, you don't want the flared ton. So depending on your bucktail, you probably want to grab it towards the upper part of your tail. Then I want this to stick out about halfway, half the length of the jig head. So give it a cut. And now we're just going to hold this on top, and we're just going to do 2 or 3 loose wraps. Then we're going to push it down. And we want this to cover a little more than half of the collar on this jig. When jigs have collars like this, you want to make sure you spread your materials out so there's not a gap in between the jig materials and the collar. The fish don't care, but it just looks a little unfinished. So for the first piece of flash, we're going to be using Ripple ice fibers. I'm going to be using this throughout the bait. So put most of it out the back, then wrap it back and cover that up. And you want to keep making sure you keep this your tying area really flat. That way your thread doesn't move around the shank, and it'll kind of make for a not fun tying experience. So come in with some Marabou. I typically use Marabou like this that I probably wouldn't use anyways because it's not great. But this one's already kind of started. You can see it's got the tip already pulled out. We want to pull it out so we can put Marabou down each side of the shank of the hook, and the stem won't get caught on the hook point. So come in, lay it down, and wrap it in. Sometimes the stems get a little thicker. You kind of have to negotiate them a little bit, but that you can get that down. Stroke that back so all your materials are down, a little bit down each side. Really tie that in. We're going to come to another piece of Ripple ice fiber, maybe twice as much as we used the previous time. Again, stick the long end a little past the bucktail and tie it in. When you tie it in, you want to stay tight to the jig head. That way there's not a gap between your materials and your jig head. You're just trying to keep everything smooth and tight so your materials aren't going to slip. Now, since we used Marabou there instead of bucktail, this next piece of bucktail, I grabbed farther down the tail, so that way this is going to flare a little bit more. And what that will do is give that Marabou a little bit room to breathe. And you want this to be just a little bit shorter than the orange, kind of trying to build a taper into the jig head. And keep this on top and do a bunch of nice tight turns. And as you can see, that bucktail sticks up a little bit. It looks kind of ridiculous now, but once it lays down, it will really give that Marabou room to move. A final piece of Ripple ice. This one we're gonna cut shorter because it's not a super long piece. You want the longest piece to be just the same length as your bucktail, then fold it back again like you have been doing. And now to finish this jig, we're going to take about 3 pieces of grizzly Flashabou and take that and tie that in about the length of the tan bucktail. Fold it back, and then when you fold it back, you want to cut that second piece about halfway down so it kind of tapers visually, and you kind of keep that taper that we're going through with this jig. Tie that in, cut it a little shorter, and just tidy up this head. Cover up all those materials the best you can. You can see up front here I've got a little gap between my materials and my jig head, so I want to make sure I go in there and fill that gap in so nothing moves. That looks pretty good. So just whip finish and your choice of head cement and you are all set. I'm using, as normal, I'm using S.O.L bone dry. I got some paint on this brush, so it's a little black right now, but it won't matter for this jig. Hit it with the light. Really get that glue locked in place. And you're all set. You can see here you got a nice taper jig with a lot of movement, a lot of color. Give it a try. You won't be disappointed. Thanks for watching.